Hey, everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. We are 1 week post our big monthly patch, and we have some exciting things to talk about. We want to talk about meta, we want to talk about new card, new location, etc., and maybe some spicy conversation that's been going around on the internet. And so we will dive right into the topic today. I am joined by first-time guest on the podcast, Zombies Go Nom Nom. Zombies, thank you for being here.
Hey, how's it going? I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on. It's actually been a couple weeks since we've had somebody new on, so it's always exciting to have kind of a first-time guest here for the listeners. Before we dive into the topics I alluded to, want to give you a chance to just kind of introduce yourself to the listeners, background with gaming, content creation, Marvel Snap, just a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I've been doing full-time content creation for a little bit now since, I think it was late last year, like November last year, or 2 years ago, actually. It's been flying by, like a year and a half. So I switched to Marvel Snap. I was initially doing Hearthstone content for Hearthstone Mercenaries for like the 5 people who might remember that, one of which was fellow Snap Zone writer Safety Blade. That's how Safety Blade and I first met. And then that eventually kind of died down a bit, and I played Snap in beta, but I was really casual about it. It was just kind of a fun thing on the side, and I really liked it, but I ended up quitting the game for a while, got distracted with other stuff, came back at launch, and decided that was kind of the direction I wanted to take my content. And it was, I think it was a great decision. I really love the game, very much enjoy the community around it. And I'm excited to talk about the kind of recent developments we've had going on.
Yeah, it's been for me at least kind of a more exciting week than in recent memory. I feel like some
Definitely.
things have balanced out, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. Because first we want to dive into always new card of the week.
Mm-hmm.
So Stegron is the new card this week, and I will read the description here. So Stegron is a 4-cost, 5-power card with the ability on reveal, move an enemy card from here to another location. I always just try to make sure this is explicit. Like, what does that description mean? So this is not you picking a
Mm-hmm.
card on your opponent's side of the board and choosing where it goes. It's kind of like Juggernaut in the sense that it will move a card there, and it will move it to one of the other 2 locations randomly, right?
Yeah.
If a location's already full, it can't go there, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of like Juggernaut, but it can be for a card that's already been played. It doesn't have to be played that turn. So I always like to turn it over to the guest first. Let's just talk general impressions, thoughts. How do you feel like this card measures up? What kind of excitement have you seen online today about this card?
So I picked this one up late last night, shortly after the release. It was weird. They did a late night release
Yeah,
because of
that threw
the
me off. I was
yeah.
surprised by that.
I think we all were a little surprised, and it was even later than like it was supposed to be, I guess, because the timer went down to 0. And I don't know if you saw, but there were some reports of double Jeff in the shop. It was pretty funny. But Stegron came out last night, and it's a pretty neat card. I think it's kind of been at least a little bit underrated. I don't think he's the best card in the world, but I do think there's some fun and interesting potential with it. And he does have a really cool animation too, where he kind of like whips the tail to move the card around. So it's always kind of neat to see that. But I think I was higher on this card than most of the other people I talked to. I don't think it's really a flashy 6K buy for, I think, most players, unless you have most of the cards you want already. But it is a really fun card to play with. I found myself really enjoying the effect. I really like the Juggernaut type effects, arrow, all the move where you're moving opponent stuff. I think is really fun. And my favorite thing I've done with it so far is you give them the void with sentry, and then they give up on that lane. So sometimes it's the only thing there. And then you can just bop it somewhere else for another -10. So it's like an enlarged hobgoblin, but they don't really see it coming. And
Oh
that's
yeah,
been really fun.
yeah. That sounds spicy. We had a guest on the podcast a couple weeks ago. Now I'm blanking on his name. The Jolly Roger, who does
Oh, okay.
the Marvel Snap show over on TikTok, and he's a huge fan of the Void, and now I'm forgetting the first card's name. The 410 that you just
Oh,
described.
Sentry.
Sentry,
The
sorry.
one that got buffed recently. Yeah, the
Yes,
Sentry
yeah.
buff.
He's a huge Sentry fan, so that sounds like something he would want to try out as well. But yeah, I just want to kind of touch on a couple things you said. I think when we kind of initially saw the cards coming out this month, I think general impression with Stegron was kind of bottom tier of the cards coming out this month by a
Yeah.
lot of people. I'm not saying that's just because some people said that online, it's true, but I think part of that, at least in my perception, is that move is seen by a lot of people as not very competitive, right? People argue on that both ways, right? And so I think that could be a whole conversation itself, and will continue to be an ongoing conversation. But I think some people say, oh, it's a move card, it's not as good, or it's not giving me extra power on my side of the board, right? It's not buffing my card, so must not be good as something else. But I think there's a lot of power. I mean, you kind of compared it to Arrow, right? In the sense that it's kind of you controlling a little bit of how and where your opponent's cards go.
Yeah.
And I think that can be very powerful, especially played, you can play Stegron on turn 4, but playing on turn 6, right, can maybe be that surprise play that your opponent didn't expect, right?
Yeah, and sometimes, like, especially he pairs so well with Zabu, and sometimes it's really not an unreasonable tempo play to just kind of mess up. Usually, with the location, sometimes the locations really kind of backfire on some of these decks, so you really want to avoid one of them, and then just getting to kind of knock their thing into a different lane, and especially if you're already running stuff to clog up the lanes, like that's why I kind of like the Sentry deck because there's a lot of redundancy. If you really dislike Galactus, like the Sentry deck might be your best friend because it's like half the cards in the deck single-handedly counter it, and it's definitely been a lot of fun. It's cool to see there have been so many different builds of it. So like I played one with Stegron and without him, trying like Jeff in the spot because there's a lot of lane lockdown stuff, and they've both been really interesting. They play very differently, but I think Stegron, I think he's being a little bit slept on as kind of a result of, well, it's cool, but it's not like when you have some of these other really cool cards that are coming up in May and especially June. I don't think people mind waiting a little bit for this one. And we saw that with other cards in the past. Like we just had Stature drop, and that was one I waited for to drop, and I've been really enjoying that card. So I think you're going to get a handful of cards like that where people don't bite at the 6K mark, but once it falls down and you kind of open it naturally, I think people are going to have a lot of fun with this card.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's several cards like that. Another one that comes to mind is Master Mold. I think we've
Yeah.
seen that Master Mold's probably a good card, but again, it maybe doesn't have that like marketing appeal. Like, oh, it's this cool thing that seems super overpowered, so I'm going to spend 6,000 tokens. But once some of these cards comes down, I mean, they could be meta shifting in some cases, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a potentially impactful card. I've seen a few different people trying it out, and obviously it's only been like less than 24 hours, but I think it's been really neat. The only, I think, one complaint I've seen that's a little justified is I'm surprised it's a 4/5 when there are quite a few. Well, there are at least a handful of good 4/6s, and I'm surprised they aired on the side of caution there. But move can be really tricky, so I mean, we've seen them bump around the power quite a bit on like Arrow and other move cards, so it's a powerful effect, even though, like you said, it's not always seen as the most competitive thing by a lot of people. Like I haven't played a bunch of full on move decks, but I think when you add in an element of especially moving opponent stuff around, it really and it surprises the opponent on top of that, it can be really powerful.
Yeah. A couple of thoughts. First, just talking move. We alluded to this in last week's episode, but we've seen leaked cards for June at this point. I mean, if you're one to look at those cards, then a lot of move cards coming, is I guess what we'll say. I'm really interested. Obviously, Stegron's kind of moving your opponent's board, and some of these cards are moving your cards, etc. But I just think move is only going to get better in the next couple of months, and people maybe will start to appreciate the move play style a little bit more. But that being said, I think move is one of the most complex things to play. I think it can play at a high level right now. It's just very complex and difficult. I'm not a great move player. I enjoy the idea of like playing a move deck, but when I do it, I just feel like I like can't turn on my galaxy brain, you know,
Yeah.
to make it work as well as some other people. So yeah, interested to see there. But kind of turning from there, we've already alluded to some synergies with Stegron, but I want to just talk kind of our top few cards or decks that
Mhm.
Stegron kind of slots in with. Um, I'll say a couple first. You kind of already called this out, but like I think Zabu, Sarah, right? Cost reduction with this card, I think, is powerful.
Mhm.
Especially kind of if you get Zabu and Sarah on the board, Stegron becomes a 2-cost card. You can play it on the 6th turn of the game, which still gives you a lot of wiggle room to play other stuff on that turn, but kind of have that surprise factor at the very end of the game. I think can be very powerful.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing I think I'm sure you've seen and probably tried out yourself is Miles Morales.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, kind of Miles, sees play whenever kind of a new move card comes out or move cards see prominently. But yeah, I want to hear some of your thoughts, other synergies or other kind of key things you think people should be thinking of when they're thinking of Stegron.
So it's one thing I really liked. I haven't tried Stegron out in it yet, but I was doing I called it like a tempo move deck. And it was something I tried out a while ago, a few months ago, but it got some pretty good additions. I mean, the main big addition was Jeff, because we needed another card like Nightcrawler to kind of move around. Like I kind of agree with what you said a lot. Like I'm not really a move player. Like if I'm playing like a full all-in move deck, I'm usually going to make a lot of mistakes because I just don't play those type of decks really. But I like these ones where it's less about me moving my own stuff around. Like that'll happen occasionally and it can be beneficial, but it's not like the focus of the deck. It's just kind of an added benefit of
Mm,
flexibility because I mean, I think people have seen it with Jeff coming out. The flexibility of being able to just kind of change up your mind on where, like, hey, I played this here. Let me put it here instead. Things have changed in the game. Maybe I no longer want a 2-drop on the right for whatever reason, or I want it in like a death domain that we can't get into. So I think move is really powerful when you're doing stuff like that, where you're unexpectedly like reacting to the board and what your opponent's doing, and when you're doing lane control stuff, instead
hmm
of trying to do a big flashy like Heimdall turn that like everyone knows when that's about to happen, right? I mean, it can still win sometimes, but it's very telegraphed. And I think with this deck, using things like Polaris and Arrow, and then I found the one really cool card has been Craven, because he
mm,
just naturally gets pretty big. You don't need him to get really insane. I mean, if he ends up being like a 2/6, that's pretty good when
yeah.
it's just doing stuff you want your deck to be doing. And you mentioned Miles. I found Miles has been really nice in that shell because it's a tempo oriented deck. So you're trying to put out like you're trying to make an impact every turn, and then try and take your opponent by surprise at the end sometimes, or just outstat them. And a lot of people don't play around Arrow as much anymore unless you're running into the Electro ramp deck. And I think even though she's been changed, she can be a really good card still. And I'm curious to try Stegron in the deck. It's so tricky because there, even though Move has never had like a crazy amount of support, it does feel like a list where I find it difficult to cut stuff because now with Jeff and Nightcrawler, I find Angela's finally feeling good enough for that deck because you can boost her up so much by playing
Yeah.
stuff there, moving it away, playing more stuff thereafter. It's just been very powerful synergies. So I really like Stegron for that reason. And I'm definitely excited for some of the other upcoming move stuff because I think we're finally going to get it's going to be like a critical mass of it, but you're not going to necessarily easily fit it all in one deck. So I think there are going to be a lot of different variations of the move deck, and I'm excited to see kind of how that goes because, like this version, it doesn't feel as much of a move deck. It's more about moving control, kind of in a way where you're surprising the opponent with a Juggernaut or moving with the Polaris to kind of close out their lane. It's but I find that to be so fun. It's more fun to me than the standard move stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a fair point. I think that's the thing that interests me most with Stegron is kind of more of the control. That deck that I'm looking at a list that's similar to what you're describing right now, and yeah, I think he slots in there nicely. And to what you said, right? It's like, what do you cut? I guess that's like a good problem to have, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
like
It's true.
it's like a blessing and a curse, you
Mhm.
know. So yeah, and I think that's only going to get harder with in
Oh,
a
for
good way
sure.
with more move cards. I mean, it's really going to open up the floodgates of like what people are going to start trying to optimize move even more and say like what is the optimal lists, plural. So yeah, Stegron, interesting card. Interested to see what people do with it. I haven't purchased it myself. I'm sitting on 12,000 tokens, and I think I just feel a little bit of purchase paralysis. I don't know what I want to buy, but I'm trying to keep my options open and see, between now and next month what I want to get. But we will be moving on here to our next topic, and that topic is new location this week. So
boy.
now we're getting new locations every other week. And we're only seeing them for 24 hours featured. So that's been the last month and a half or so, I want to say. So this week we're getting the Sandbar. The Sandbar reads, cards with abilities can't be played here. So correct me if I'm wrong. The way I read this, abilities in this case, the language of the game means if it has text, right?
Yeah.
If it has like any ability or text, so that's on reveal, ongoing, or just like it has text of something that happens at a certain time, like Bishop or Angela, right?
Yeah.
So really the only cards that can be played there in their initial play, like time being played, are, your Misty Knight, Wasp, Shocker, all the way up to Hulk, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the obvious thing to state. It does say cards with abilities can't be played here, but cards that add cards to another location, those can be added here, right? So Squirrel Girl,
Yeah. I can get around it. A vision sneaking
Vision,
in.
yeah, things can move into this location. So we were just talking a bunch about move, right? You can move into this location, but want to turn it over to you. General thoughts to start us off on this location.
Well, this one's coming at a really funny time because we have seen kind of things evolve in a way where Sandman Ramp and Galactus were by far the most popular things. People theorized that Patriot would end up doing really well against those two particular decks, and that ended up being true. We saw Patriot just totally demolish a tournament with like the full top four all being different Patriot decks, and we're seeing Super Scroll. That's how good Patriot has been recently. Is they're teching Super Scroll for the mirror, which I think that was like a meme when Super Scroll came out, or like maybe when there was an Onslaught Citadel hot location, people would break it out. But now we're seeing it like sorry, but it's I think this is going to be one people don't like because Patriot's already popular. Patriot's good. You can get into this other ways, but it's kind of like just another. This reminds me of Plunder Castle, except more annoying, and people hated Plunder Castle, justifiably so in some cases. So I think less of these is kind of good. It's not the worst location in the world, but it's kind of boring in how you approach it because either you're playing Patriot or you're gonna play something tries to counter Patriot probably.
Yeah. For the record, I still hate Plunder Castle. I play a lot of decks without 6 cross cards, and so whenever that pops up, I'm like, well, this just sucks because my opponent probably can play there and I can't. But yeah, I think this is going to be a spicy one. We'll talk more on Patriot in the future, upcoming here on the episode. But yeah, Patriot's been being played a ton. I've been playing a lot of Patriot, so I imagine the 24 hours of Sandbar is like if you draw the best ongoing cards and you get your super scroll down, like you win the game basically, right? It's
Yeah,
like
it's
can you play like Patriot on 3, Mystique on 4, Blue Marvel on 5, and your I just said it, Super Scroll on 6,
yeah.
right? Essentially, right? If you get that, like you win the game.
Or you just
Uh,
copy. Some people have been using the Mystique to copy the Super Scroll, and now they won't copy each other because that would make an infinite loop. So they kind of prevented that. But I was saying it's going to be so Patriot heavy. I bet they're going to be some people not only having the Super Scroll but having the Rogue to counter the Super Scroll. I think it's going to
yeah,
get that deep for the next day.
I mean, and it's so interesting because like you think if you're playing that in a Patriot deck, like you're replacing cards with like multiple tech cards, So then it's like, do you become so hyper focused on the ongoing cards that like buff your cards without abilities that you're not able to actually play your cards without abilities? So then it's not as good, right? So yeah, and then obviously, Enchantress, right? If you're playing kind of hard counter to this location, I think that's going to be your strat here.
That and Killmonger pretty much.
Yeah,
It just seems
yeah.
like the move. So break out the Saras because it's going to be needed.
Yeah. Bring all the counters to the party. And yeah, I think it's one of those times where, I'm like, this is going to be a long 24 hours. I'm not sure if I'm going to play as much during 24 hours. And the funny thing is, like, I've been playing like a decent amount of Patriot over the last week, but knowing that like it's going to be like every match is a mirror match, or it's going to feel that way, right?
Yeah, especially with the Super Scrolls, it's just so, oh man, it feels bad losing to a Super Scroll. I've got to say, it's cool that the card is finally having a bit of a moment, but oh man, does it feel bad to lose to that? Just have all your ongoings flipped against you.
Yeah, there's been quite a few matches over the last week where I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is looking really good. I'm ahead, and then they just flip that Super Scroll on 6, and I'm like,
yeah,
oh man,
it's because it really messes with the Dino Darkhawk deck too. It's crazy in the mirror for Patriot. Sometimes you catch like a rogue Iron Man or something. Like there's just a lot of ongoing. We've seen like half the Thanos lists are all ongoing stuff, and man, from what I've heard, they really don't appreciate that Super Scroll. So it's been really interesting to see how it's kind of trending in that direction, since I mean we never really seen it, I think, to this level before in like terms of popular ongoing stuff being around.
Yeah, I guess my final take on this is I don't feel as stressed or concerned about this as I have in the past, where it was like a 48-hour featured location. I think the 24 hours, it's like I'm still gonna play that day. I'm not gonna like skip the whole day playing, right? But like whether I play more or less, like it's kind of like, before it was like after that first 24 hours, I was just like, I'm done. Like
that was a great change.
Yeah. So listeners, I'm curious your thoughts if you feel the same. But yeah, I think this is an interesting location. Again, they're just trying to fill every little nook and cranny of the design space with locations over time. So there's going to be ones we love, ones we hate, and ones in the middle. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how the 24 hours plays out. Do you have any closing thoughts on Sandbar?
Not a whole lot. It's just I just think it's kind of comedic timing given how popular Patriot became. But yeah, really nice. This is only a day because I think as we've seen with some of the other ones in the past, 2 days was just too much for some of these like really annoying lockdown ones where it's like I kind of just want to play the deck I want to play, and this is one of those locations that just says, well, because of that, you're no longer allowed to play on a third of the board most of the time. And it's like people, I think they've even admitted when people have asked about locations that they may have gone a little bit too far in terms of like just the sheer amount of these like very restrictive ones. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see them do a bit less of these. Because I think they're some of the more disliked locations in the game. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't like hate it or anything, but it's a lot less fun than some of the other recent ones we've seen.
Yeah, I like something that does something very unique and adds to the gameplay. I think like the one that comes to my mind, I'm not saying it's my favorite, Gamma Lab, right? Does something very unique. And when it pops up, it's like, oh, do I play for this? Do I not? Does my opponent have Shang-Chi? Do I have Shang-Chi? Right?
Yeah.
It kind of like it changes the game and makes you adapt in a fun, unique way. I'd love to see more locations that kind of go along that theme of like it has a unique ability that kind of makes that game memorable, if you will. So awesome. Well, we will take a quick break here, an ad break, and then we will go to our next topic. Hey all, I wanted to take a quick moment to talk to you about MarvelSnapZone.com. Marvel Snap Zone is a one-stop shop for everything Marvel Snap on the internet. They have new articles nearly every day that cover deck building, strategy, card breakdowns, etc. They have a great collection tracker tool and a deck list builder that works off of that collection tracker, so that you can know what decks you can build with your current card collection. They have guides and deck lists for all level of players and all collection level of players. Make sure to go to marvelsnapzone.com and check it out now. Okay, we will continue on here. And I always make faces disappear there. For people that may be watching the video on YouTube, usually I do a pretty good job with our transitions. I don't have a technical support person doing here, but today's been a little bit of an off day. Maybe we'll fix some of it in our post-production, but we will continue on here to our next topic, which is the state of the meta. We have been alluding to this, obviously, in some of our ongoing conversation here, but I did want to dedicate 5 to 10 minutes just talking what has kind of risen, what has fallen in the last week since the patch. We've seen the fall, if you will, of Shuri. I think I still think Shuri is a decent card. I don't think Shuri's dead, but it's obviously nowhere near kind of that tier S or tier 1 dominating force, which I think is a good thing. But whenever something kind of shifts from the top, right? You never know if 1 or 5 or 10 things are going to shift to the top, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about, what's been your experience? What's the conversation you've been seeing online? For those watching the video version of the podcast, we've just got the latest list here from marvelsnapzone.com, the tier list that they update every week. So we'll probably be referencing some of these as we go. But I want to just, again, turn it over to you first. What's been your thoughts, general impressions of the meta over the last week?
So I think things have been playing out kind of as expected, but in like a good way. Where we saw kind of the initial rush after the patch. Everyone kind of ran to the Electro deck. Part of that was fueled by, Leader got buffed, made a kind of real card again, even though he's not anywhere near what he used to be. He's much more of a playable card, especially in that kind of archetype. So I think that kind of boosted up the interest and the fact that people knew, hey, this is already a good deck and it dodged the nerfs in the patch. So anytime that happens, I think you're always going to see some people flock to a list that is very proven, or in this case, got a little bonus added to it. And a lot of people wanted to try that card again. It's always fun. It's kind of like we got a new card in some ways. So that was pretty expected. I used that for most of my climb this month, just kind of farming the Hitmonkey decks before the nerfs. And the deck was very, very effective. And it was really underplayed for a while, and then it really spiked up. And then Galactus was popping around too, because that was another deck where it's not really bothered by the changes that happened. And if anything, it just has a better matchup against the field because it's pretty good against the Electro deck if they don't draw Arrow or sometimes Magneto. But I think generally the Galactus deck is also really good against the Electro deck. So that really rose in popularity. And though he's polarizing, Galactus is a card a lot of people just really enjoy it. It's something that they like playing a ton. So I think that has more to do with the play rate there and the fact that it's just good against Electro Ramp, which was by far the most popular thing. Dino Darkhawk is really, really good, but you don't see it, or at least I don't see it as much post Infinite. And looking at the data kind of back that up a bit, where I think it's almost twice the amount when you're looking at 70 through 99 compared to Infinite Plus or 100 plus. And I think the reason for that is it's a deck people played a ton of, or at least I did, and I noticed some others were playing a lot of the deck shortly before the Shuri changes went live. And I think most people who played it a lot were kind of the mind that this deck is good, it's proven, it's still going to be good, but we all kind of wanted to try different stuff now that the field was a bit more open. So I think it's actually still underplayed relative to how it's just a very smooth, powerful deck because you're doing some disruption things and the rocks, you're putting out a lot of power. It's just, and you're making it hard to interact with sometimes with Armor, Cosmo. So seeing the 4 decks here in tier 1, I think this makes a lot of sense. This is kind of I kind of want to say it's like a trifecta plus the Dino Darkhawk, because I think we have like a triangle here of Electro Ramp, Sarah Control, and Patriot, where they kind of each feast on one another. And so I think we're going to see those kind of bop around a lot here in terms of like one becomes the most popular and then the other one rises up to kind of counter it. And then as we can see like below, there's going to be other stuff that works against these strategies. I don't think we're in an environment where one thing kind of reigns supreme. It's very contextual to like what the rest of the field is. And it feels really nice. It feels so much more open and interesting. And especially at Infinite, I'm seeing just so many different things people are trying. People are trying all kinds of decks. And it really reminds me a lot of the kind of not right at launch, global launch, but like a little bit after global launch. I really enjoyed that meta kind of after I think the first nerfs to Destroyer and Angela. I really enjoyed how the game kind of felt like then there was a lot of reason to think about your individual decisions, to count it out, making predictions. And I feel like after the change, not only because of the Shuri stuff, but I think the Lockjaw change, I
Mm.
didn't realize how much it was kind of waning on me that anytime I ran into a Thanos Lockjaw, which is about half of my games, more or less, like there was a lot less decision making from my end other than seeing, all right, they're throwing the stone in the jaw. Are they getting a big thing or are they getting a tiny stone? And then having to react accordingly. But it wasn't the same level. I didn't find it the same level of satisfying as kind of like predicting what people are going to play out and if you can counter it. So I've been really enjoying the changes, and I think the tier list is, I think, pretty reflective of my experience on the ladder. I think there are definitely some like fringe archetypes that haven't been fully developed yet. Like a lot of different stature stuff has been being brewed around, and some of those are pretty similar to lists like the Doom Wave deck, but they're kind of their own thing. We're still seeing Thanos change up a lot. I don't think it's anywhere near settled what the best new version of Thanos looks like. So it's a really enjoyable time to be playing Marvel Snap, in my opinion. It's
Yeah.
just really great. This deck variety, we're seeing people try so much fun, interesting stuff, and it doesn't feel like there's after dealing with Shuri and to a slightly lesser extent Thanos for so long. It was very refreshing to be in a meta where there's not one top dog I'm expecting to see like every game or every other game.
Yeah, it's this interesting. The way I'm thinking about it is like it's very unique in the sense that sometimes, like when there's one really, really good thing, it's like it's kind of like, oh, that's what you expect, and like everybody's going to try it and play it, and it
Mm-hmm.
feels like predictable, which somehow I think, at least, I mean, I hated it, right? But like it felt safe. It felt like I knew what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, it's like there's more things that are happening and people are trying new things, which is a good thing. But then I feel like more lost, which is a good thing. But I think there's that part of my brain is like, I don't know what I'm going to be playing against
Yeah.
anymore. And I don't know what my opponent's going to do, which is a good thing. Again, I want to iterate that's a good thing. But I think my brain plays tricks on me of like, oh, like I feel lost. I'm figuring out what's happening. What should I be playing? What are my opponents playing?
Mm-hmm.
But when I take a step back, obviously I feel positive about that. I think it's a good thing. I think this is the healthiest meta we've probably had in a little while. Not saying it's perfect. I don't remember, listeners, don't think I said that it's perfect. I think
Mm-hmm.
sure there's more tweaking. I'm really excited for the weekly adjustments we're going to be getting starting now, right?
Yeah, that's super
Um,
exciting. Can't wait to see what they pop up for. It's starting this week, right? This Thursday, I believe.
they made it. Yeah, they said after the patch, which was last week. So yeah, so it should be this Thursday. Every Thursday
Awesome.
going forward until the end of May at least is what they said.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's great, right? We've balanced out the meta a little bit. Yeah, there's some things that are stronger than other things, but they can tweak one or two pieces of those down a point, right? And they can tweak one or two things that are at the bottom up, and then all of a sudden, like the playing field is, even more balanced, and new
Mm-hmm.
things can be tried out. So yeah, I'm excited for that. I think that maybe I've grown a little tired of like the Patriot mirrors I played as I've been playing
Yeah.
Patriot, right? Like of the three, at least my perception against my individual experience, the one I've seen the most, I think, is Patriot for me. Um, compared to the Electro Ramp and Sarah Control, but I'm seeing a lot of those as well.
Yeah.
Um, And so, I am not, I wouldn't mind kind of a shakeup of let's change one thing in the Patriot deck, right? With one of these weekly adjustments, let's change one thing in the Electro Ramp, let's change one thing in the Sarah Control. And again, not trying to make those decks strictly worse or like unplayable, but like that potentially makes things like Bounce Monkey, Discard Dracula, some of these things that are in the lower tiers, all of a sudden maybe those go from tier 3 to tier 2, right? Because they have more room to breathe. So I don't know. What are your additional thoughts?
Basically, so I'm definitely, at least relative to the meta we have right now, I'm more in favor of buffing anything, or rather than nerfing anything. I don't think there's anything that stands out to me right now, even if it's like a small adjustment. I don't think there's like, I feel like in the past it's been kind of obvious when some of these things have been really like stand out over the top cards. And while there are a lot of like good decks here, I think there's less of like an obvious outlier that
Yeah.
I think like, yeah, and then by tweaking that, it could also mess with kind of the equilibrium we've seen develop between these like handful of decks, and how it's kind of shifting back and forth. Because I think it's not like it's just a rock paper scissors meta where you have to play like one of these three or one of these four. I feel like there's a lot of room. I think one of the big takeaways is that the gap of power between what is considered like a tier 1 deck and a tier 2 deck is a lot smaller than it feels like it's been in for the past few months. And that's been really awesome because you're seeing much more different brews kind of be able to attack some of these decks because they're popular enough to where you know to expect them. And that can kind of boost your deck's win rate if you're playing to the field like that. And I think that's a sign of a relatively healthy meta. So I just like to see them buff some of these underplayed cards that maybe can boost some of the lower tiered archetypes to kind of maybe, like you mentioned, discard's all right, but it's very telegraphed, right? Like, when discard has it, and that's, I think, one of their big disadvantages. So another synergy that could maybe help out with that, or like some of the move synergy we're going to be seeing in the next month or two, I think is going to hugely boost that archetype because we don't see a dedicated move deck really anywhere on here.
Yeah.
Because there's really not one list that's like the move deck. It's a very kind of feels like a kind of scattered archetype where like everyone's on like a slightly different build. But I do think there's a lot of potential there, and like I've had some decent success with that with the stature stuff. So I think there's a lot of room in the tier list here for like successful decks that might not all be listed here. And it's going to take more time for those things to be refined, right? Because it takes a little while testing a deck, iterating on it before you kind of see those long-term results.
Yeah. I didn't include it in the image here, but Marvel Snap Zone in the article they put out each week with the tier list, they highlight some silent performers of the week.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that.
Which normally like they're not quite in the statistics to like be in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But one of those is Surfer Move, right?
Yeah, I've heard about that a little bit. It's definitely I've always found that archetype really fascinating. I've never played
Yeah.
too much of it, but it's a very interesting idea.
Yeah. I think like as we're like talking, somehow that's where my mind's centered. I'm like, I'm gonna go play that after we're done talking here. I'm gonna go give that a run for its money. But yeah, I think we've covered a lot here. I think that second dinner is doing their job. It took a little while. I think people obviously felt frustrated with Shuri being a problem so long,
Yeah.
right? Because it was like a solid month and a half or
Yeah, it
longer.
was a while. It felt pretty long.
Where it's in a game where you play every day, right? That feels much longer. That feels like 6 months.
It really does.
So I think they've got us in a good spot with the latest big patch, and then anticipating kind of these small changes week by week going forward. It really kind of sets me up of like, well, are we going to need as big of a patch next month when they do their big patch, right?
Yeah, that's a good
Uh,
question.
I mean, maybe there'll still be cards to like buff that need abilities reworked, right? Which they
Yeah,
kind of
because they
have
are
to
only
wait.
doing numbers for the most part for the OTA. They're not changing
Yep.
text. So I could definitely see them not being able to get maybe every buff they'd like to try just off of a stat adjustment or a cost adjustment.
Yeah. Before we move to our last topic, I just want to on the spot question: if you got to pick one card to be in this week's OTA patch to see a buff,
Ooh.
what card would it be, and what would you like to see?
Oh, that's tough. So one that I would really love, and it's funny because I saw someone asked about it today, and they basically kind of confirmed it's not going to be a buffed card for the most part, but I'm going to say it anyway. Is Electra? I've always really liked Electra. I think Electra's a sweet card. She's really powerful in the kind of early pools, pool 1, pool 2. Really powerful card. And it's like then you get Killmonger, and all of a sudden Electra just
Yeah.
totally disappears from existence. And I don't think it's because Electra is really a bad card, but the effect is so much smaller. Obviously, you're not hitting your own stuff, but a lot of times for the Killmonger deck, you either don't run 1-drops or you want your 1-drops to blow up. So you're happy either way. So I'd like Electra to be buffed, and I think you could in the developer comment they were basically like Electra is very impactful in the early game, uh, or the early pool experience. So we don't necessarily want to make her way more powerful there, just for the sake of making her a bit more competitive in like the late pool stuff. Was
Yeah,
kind
that's
of the
interesting.
short version of the response. And I think it's a pretty valid argument, but I do think you could uh, buff Electra in a way where it doesn't impact the early game experience.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I thought would be cool and kind of thematic was if she basically her destroy was more of an exile effect, so it could get through things like armor, or like Wakanda, just general protection effects. It would be neat because, well, you're playing this understated card that can only hit one thing, and if they have multiple 1-drops, it's a random flip. I think just adding like a little bit of a bonus like that, because I've seen a lot of people suggest stat increases, and I mean I'm sure that would make the card perform better, but it's kind of a boring way to change it, and I don't think that's really what we need to do for a card like that. Um, but that's one I would love to see that I don't expect at all
Yeah.
to actually happen. But I would be really happy if they did. But I really love this change to Sentry. Like that set like a gold standard to me because I hated Sentry. Sentry, I like openly called him one of the worst cards in the game because his restriction is so bad that you can only play in 2. It sounds not as bad on the surface as it is in practice sometimes because sometimes you really need to play to the right location. And Sentry's just like, nope. And then on top of that, you had to deal with this void. And now sometimes you can do cool stuff, like give it away with Viper, but that's not going to happen every game. So it's like you had 2 big downsides on a card. And with just a small adjustment to the amount of power he had and the amount of power the Void had, it totally changed. Like that card is actually seeing play. I've had a ton of fun with the card. It felt like I got a new card essentially off
Yeah.
of a relatively minor change. And it fits the character more too, because Sentry's supposed to be this really ultra powerful being. So having him be kind of really on the top end of the 4-cost spectrum makes a lot of sense, like lore wise, thematic, and it just makes him a more interesting card. Because like, well, he has this big downside, but you're getting something above rate for the downside. And how do you mitigate that to make it an upside? And those kind of cards are really fun to build around. So anything kind of like that, like do more buffs like Sentry, basically.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love what they did with the first OTA patch. We are coming up on the end of our time. We've only got a couple minutes left here. So this will be kind of our rapid fire spicy ending topic here. And that is Galactus.
Hmm.
Again, we can only spend a couple minutes here, but you and me were talking a little bit before the show. Galactus is highly debated right now online. I'm seeing it on Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, in the Discord. I'm seeing it all over Marvel Snap. And the argument, people on one end say delete Galactus. He fundamentally changes the game. It's not fun to play against. Yes,
Hmm.
maybe it's telegraphed, but it just isn't fun. And when when Galactus is played, it's like if your deck's not set up to be successful against Galactus, you can't win. People on the other end, say, well, he's very telegraphed. You just need to counter him. You just retreat, right? That's why we have the retreat system and the snapping system we do.
Hmm.
You don't have, you just lose that one cube and you go to another match and don't worry about it. Move on with your life. Obviously, we could spend a whole hour just talking about
Yeah.
that.
I'm
But I
sure.
want to get your quick take. Where do you fall on the spectrum? What is your advice to listeners? What would be your advice to second dinner on Galactus?
So I'm known to enjoy a bit of Galactus in moderation. I find myself very much not super heavy in one direction or the other in terms of loving or hating the card. It's a card I like to break out once in a while, or especially if there's like a new card that supports it, or if there's like a location that seems favorable. Because I mean, we've seen a lot of those in the last few months, like Plunder Castle, or no, Space Throne. Space Throne was that was like a diabolical time. Like I felt like a supervillain with the Galactus deck when that was the hot location. But the thing about this card is like it makes sense why it's really polarizing. People do not like that the decisions come down from 3 lanes to 1 lane.
Yep.
It is very easily counterable. I think one thing that annoyed me about Galactus was it annoyed me before I got the card and I played it and I got to actually like be on the other end of it because like psychologically we're going to remember the times if something annoys you, you're going to remember the times you lose to that thing or that thing comes up more than you're going to remember the times that that thing didn't happen. So like Galactus kind of suffers. It's kind of like old leader in a way. I mean that card was way more overpowered, but you remember the times like that it gets you way more than the times that it doesn't. And the flip side of it is I know a lot of people are really vocal about hating the card, but I think like there's another side of the coin where there are I know so many people who love this card to death, and it's just like their thing to do. They absolutely enjoy it. They aren't even putting up like super impressive win rates with it, but they're having just a really good time.
Yeah.
And so I think for that reason, I think like the idea of like significantly like super nerfing this card in some way or fundamentally changing it, I don't think it's really necessary. It's not a card you want to be uh, a huge percentage of the meta. And I think that's where these complaints are coming from. And I do think it is going to self correct because if Galactus just stays, if people are stubborn and they want to keep playing their Galactus list, whoever blinks first in that game of chicken, like if people want to counter Galactus, they can force the Galactuses into hiding with enough effort. Like it'll just happen if it stays
Yeah.
that popular. We've already it's kind of why Patriot popped up a bit, right? Because you have Debris, you have Cosmo, you'll have Initiative most of the time. It's a really good deck at dealing with Galactus and the junk deck that I was talking about with Sentry. I love playing that, and like half your whole deck just counters them. Even if they get it to pop off, you can Professor X them, like where you see them going. So I understand, and I don't think people's feelings are like invalid, like finding it frustrating. But I do think, like you kind of mentioned, it's. I find it really easy to just if I know if they've got me beat. Sometimes I'll risk it for fun post infinite, just to kind of make them have it because they don't always. They do most of the time, but not always. Once he's popped off. But I find the other thing that's really like funny to me is I find it really satisfying when you're the person countering the Galactus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that isn't talked about quite as much. I mean, I've seen it expressed because people really like to emote spam when they counter you with Galactus, from what I've seen. Because some people really dislike the card. But I think it's important to remember, like, I think for every person who really dislikes the card, there's a reason it's so played, even when it's really looking at the stats, not this like objectively really powerful meta dominating deck. It's like it can do a good thing and win games sometimes, but its stats have always been not putting up the numbers. And there's a reason you don't see people bring Galactus in tournaments, right? Like when was the last time we saw that? It just doesn't really happen because when people know, hey, there's going to be a bunch of Galactus around, it's very easy to make that rough for the Galactus player. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of where I fall. I think, I mean, if it ever gets to that point where it's taking up, like, where it's like, anywhere even close to like where we saw like pre nerf Shuri, where these some of these have like 25-30% of the metagame or whatever it was, like then maybe you need to take a look. But for now, I don't think it's a game balance problem personally.
Yeah. I think that's a solid take. Appreciate the thoughts there. Listeners, let us know, if you agree, disagree. I know this is kind of an ongoing conversation, so would love to hear feedback online. But with that, we are out of time. So Zombies, I want to thank you again for being here. But before we go, I want to give you a chance. Just give us a shout out. Where can people find you? How can they best support the content that you're putting out for Marvel Snap?
Yeah, so I do pretty much daily stuff over on YouTube. Zombies Go Nom Nom over there, just like it is on the screen. I also stream on Twitch. I'm trying to do that a bit more regularly because I'm really enjoying the game right now. Twitch is slightly different. It's Zombies with a Z at the end of it. Go Nom Nom. Because I guess the S was taken. And then I also do a bi-weekly podcast. So every 2 weeks, we do the Born to be Cosmo show. A couple of friends and I, mainly prior Hearthstone players, been playing a lot of Snap since release. And in my case, a bit before release, we decided to do a fun little show about it. And really enjoy doing that. It's only every 2 weeks, but it's much like we did on here. It's a lot of fun just kind of talking about the game, where things are at, where they're going, kind of what we hope to see in the future, all that good stuff. So you can find that at Born to be Cosmo on Twitter, YouTube, and all the podcasting platforms. And then Twitter as well. I try and put out decks on Twitter and sometimes memes. I put out like a meme a day until the Sherry deck got nerfed. I thought it was going to be a cute little thing to do for like a week, and I think I ended up with like 3 weeks worth of memes. I was running out at the end. But yeah, those are all the spots you can find me. Thanks a lot for having me on. It's always a fun time to talk about the game.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Make sure you go follow Zombies at all those great locations. We will have those written in the description of the episode. And we will catch you in the next episode. Thanks. Can't Stop Snapping is a podcast written, recorded, produced, and hosted by Michael Thurman. Thanks for listening.